I watched my daughter get physically grabbed and hauled out of a restaurant by her grandmother while I was gone for 60 seconds, and nobody, absolutely nobody, did a single thing to stop it. My name is Rachel. I'm 34 years old, and I need to tell you about the birthday party that changed everything in my family, because what happened that night will matter to you. If you've ever felt like you didn't quite belong somewhere, or if you've ever loved someone who was treated like they didn't belong. Let me back up though, because this didn't start at that restaurant. It started 4 years earlier, on the day I introduced my 7-year-old daughter Amber to her new stepfather, and the moment his mother, Patricia, looked at her and decided she wasn't quite the right fit for the family. I'm still angry about that moment, to be honest. 4 years of watching someone you love get slowly erased from a family that claimed to want to include you, it changes something in you. I had been a single mother for 7 years before I met Marcus. Amber was born when I was barely 27, and her biological father decided he wasn't ready for that responsibility, so it was just me and her, making a life in Southwest Atlanta near the South Side. We had our rhythms, our inside jokes, our own little world where she was seen, valued, celebrated. Then Marcus came into our lives, and he was good, genuinely, good in the way that makes you think maybe life can be easier, maybe a child deserves to have a father, maybe family is about to expand in the healthiest possible way. For the first 6 months, everything felt right. Marcus had never been married before. He was 40, settled, successful in his work, as a project manager at a construction company, and he looked at Amber like she was already his, which at 7 years old, all she wanted was for someone to look at her like that. When he proposed to me on a Tuesday evening in our kitchen while Amber was at school, I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I was thinking about her future. I was thinking about stability. I was thinking about what it would mean for her to have a father's name, a father's presence, a father's love. The first warning sign should have been his mother's face at our wedding. Patricia had a way of smiling without her eyes participating in it. That thin smile people give when they're performing happiness, but feeling something else entirely. She was looking at Amber that day while we took family photos, and there was this flicker of assessment, like she was calculating something in her head and finding it disappointing. I remember turning to Marcus and saying, "She's not happy about this, is she?" And he said something that I should have made him repeat and explain, but I didn't. He said, "She'll come around. She just needs time." Time, I thought, was the one thing we had plenty of. Time would soften things. Time would help Patricia understand that Amber was part of the package, non-negotiable, and that loving me meant loving her. I was devastatingly naive about how time works with certain people. The coldness started small. No real description, you understand. Subtle distance. At family dinners, Patricia would ask Marcus's sister Devon's kids detailed questions about school, which classes they were in, which teachers they had, what sports were they thinking of joining. She'd turn to Amber and say, "That's nice, dear," without actually asking her anything. When we visited for holidays, Patricia made a point of ordering toys for Devon's 3 children, arriving with bags and bags of wrapped presents, and then would give Amber a generic gift card with the energy of someone checking off an obligation. Amber would open it, and her face would do this thing where she was trying to smile bigger to make up for the disappointment she was feeling. That's the moment I should have said something sharp to Patricia, something that would have drawn a clear line. But Marcus would squeeze my hand, silently asking me to let it go, and I would let it go. I kept thinking about what he'd said, "She'll come around." That was my biggest mistake. When you know someone is hurting your child, and you stay silent to keep the peace, you're teaching your child that you'll choose peace over her safety. I didn't understand that yet. 4 years passed. 4 Christmases. 4 birthdays. 4 summers of family cookouts where Patricia would sit with a drink in hand and watch Amber play with her cousins, and something in her posture would tighten, like she was upset that Amber was having fun. Marcus was wonderful with Amber. That part was never the problem. He did everything: school drop-offs, helped her with homework, attended her soccer games, bandaged skinned knees. He read bedtime stories in the worst possible British accent that made her laugh until she fell asleep. On the surface, we were a real family. Underneath, there was this constant low-level current of rejection from his mother that none of us acknowledged out loud. Then came Marcus's 40th birthday. He'd been talking about turning 40 with this mix of excitement and mock dread for weeks. He said he wanted something special, something he could remember, something that brought everyone together. I threw myself into planning it. 3 weeks of research, 3 weeks of phone calls to restaurants, looking at their private event spaces, imagining how to make it perfect. I found this place called the Gramercy Table in Midtown Atlanta, the kind of restaurant where every detail was thoughtful, where the lighting made people look like the best versions of themselves, where the food was good enough to make you cry. I booked their largest private room for a Friday night in September. I ordered a custom-designed cake shaped like a 1963 Gibson SG guitar, the same model Marcus had wanted to buy for years but never had, because there was always something else that needed that money instead. When I showed him a photo of the cake design, he pulled me close and said, "You didn't have to do all this." And I told him yes, I did, because he'd become the man we both needed, and that deserved to be celebrated. Amber wanted to contribute something too. She's 9 now, tall for her age, with her daddy's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn mouth. She asked if she could make Marcus a card, something he would keep forever. For 2 nights, she sat at our dining room table with construction paper, glitter glue, colored pencils, and a vision that only she could see. I watched her work, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated, her whole body bent over the card in that way kids do when they're creating something they believe matters. She'd erase and redo letters if they weren't perfect. She'd add another layer of glitter because the shine needed to be just right. On the second night, she finally held it up and said, "Mama, I think it's ready. Daddy's going to love it so much." The pride in her voice was the kind of pride that belongs to children who've been loved well and believe other people will love them well too. I didn't know that pride was about to be shattered. The night of the party arrived. I'd gone to the restaurant early to help set up, to make sure every detail was positioned exactly as I'd imagined it. The space was beautiful, round tables draped in deep navy fabric, soft string lights hung across the ceiling, creating this warm golden glow. Everything arranged with precision. Marcus's parents were already there, along with his sister Devon and her 3 children. I noticed immediately that there was a table set up for the kids, near the window a smaller table, separate from where the adults would sit. It had 2 place settings. I remember feeling a small twist in my stomach, but I told myself it was fine. Someone would add another place setting for Amber once we all sat down. Patricia would understand that her step-granddaughter belonged at that table with her cousins, the way she always did at every other family gathering. I was wrong about that. When I asked Patricia about the seating arrangement, I tried to keep my voice light, casual, like I was asking a simple logistical question and not asking her to confirm that she loved all her grandchildren equally. She looked at me over the rim of her wine glass. She was already on her second drink by 6 in the evening, and said something that I can still replay perfectly, word for word, because certain sentences get burned into your memory. She said that the children's table was specifically for Marcus's sister's kids, since they were his actual nieces and nephews, and that Amber would be more comfortable sitting near the entrance. After all, Patricia said, with this affected brightness that made it worse, not better, we wouldn't want her to feel self-conscious being around the real cousins. I'm just thinking of her comfort. She said it like she was doing Amber a favor, like exclusion was kindness. I felt something in me shift into a different frequency entirely. I told her, very clearly, that Amber would sit either with us at the main tables or at the children's table with her cousins, period, and that there was no way I was going to allow my daughter to be segregated like she was a problem to be managed. Patricia's jaw tightened, and I could see her calculating whether to push back or retreat. She chose to walk away without responding, which I took as a victory at the time. I was so wrong about that being the end of it. 20 minutes later, and I need you to really picture this moment, because this is the moment everything changed. I was in the restroom adjusting Amber's hair clip. She'd asked me to fix it because she wanted to look perfect for her daddy, and I was there with her in that small, quiet bathroom, and we were alone in our little moment before the rest of the evening happened. That's when I heard the commotion. At first it was just raised voices, and then it was silence, that specific kind of public silence that happens when everyone stops what they're doing because something wrong is happening. I stepped out of the restroom, and what I saw in the next few seconds replays in my mind whenever I'm trying to understand cruelty. Patricia had Amber by the shoulder. My daughter. 9 years old. Amber's small body was being physically steered, there's no other word for it, toward the side hallway that led away from the main dining room. Amber's hand was still clutching the birthday card she'd made, the card she'd spent 2 nights perfecting, and her eyes were wide and confused, her feet stumbling as Patricia pushed her forward. The restaurant had gone quiet. I could feel the weight of other people's attention, other guests watching this unfold. Amber was wearing a new dress that I'd bought her especially for this night, a navy dress with small silver threads woven through it, and I remember thinking absurdly that the dress was being wasted on a child who was about to cry in an empty hallway. I heard Patricia say to Amber, her voice lower but sharp as a knife, that this room was for family only, that real grandchildren got to be part of the celebration, and that Amber would need to wait outside until the actual children finished eating. I don't actually remember moving toward them. What I remember is suddenly having Amber against my body, my arms around her, feeling her whole frame shaking. She was trying not to cry, but her shoulders were trembling. She still had the card clenched in her fist. And I remember the fury, not a hot, fast anger, but a deep, cold certainty that something irreversible was about to happen, and I had no choice but to let it. Every eye in that restaurant was on us. Every guest had witnessed a grandmother telling a child she didn't belong. Every single person was watching to see what I would do. And some part of me, the part that had been raised to be polite, to keep the peace, to smooth things over, was dying. I crushed that part deliberately. I asked Patricia what she thought she was doing, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, controlled but absolutely certain. Patricia didn't flinch. She actually had the audacity to double down. She said that Amber wasn't blood, that she had every right to decide where people sat in her son's celebration, that this was how tradition worked in families, that blood came first, always, and that I needed to stop making this into something it wasn't. She said all this while looking directly at my daughter, who was pressed against my side, still holding that card. She said it like Amber wasn't standing right there, listening to every word, learning that her grandmother had decided she wasn't real family. That's when Marcus arrived. He was still outside, still in the process of taking off his jacket, coming in early to help, or maybe just to see if he could squeeze in a moment with me before everything started. And he stopped dead when he saw the scene. I watched his face, and it was like watching someone wake up to something they'd been choosing not to see. He saw his mother standing in front of his stepdaughter. He saw his wife's fury. He saw his mother's unapologetic expression. He saw Amber's tear-streaked cheeks and the crumpled birthday card in her fist where Patricia's grip had bent it. He saw everything all at once. And something in him, some switch that had been waiting 40 years to flip, shifted. He walked past his mother without saying a word to her. He walked straight to Amber, and he got down on one knee, so his face was at her level. And he gently, carefully took that birthday card from her hands. He smoothed out the corner where Patricia had bent it. He looked at the card, really looked at it, taking in every letter, every piece of glitter, every ounce of love Amber had poured into 2 nights of work. Then he stood up and turned to face the entire room. Every guest, every family member, every person who'd been pretending this was normal. And he said something that I will carry for the rest of my life. His voice wasn't loud, but it reached every corner of that restaurant. He said that he wanted everyone in that room to hear this clearly, because he was only going to say it once. He said that Amber was his daughter. Not by blood, but by every choice that actually mattered. Every school drop-off in the early morning when he was still groggy with sleep. Every homework assignment he'd helped her through. Every soccer game he'd attended. Every scrape he'd bandaged. Every bedtime story he'd read in that ridiculous British accent that made her laugh. He said that a person who thought family was only about DNA didn't understand what family meant at all. He said that family is built in kitchens and car rides and small moments of showing up, and that blood has nothing to do with it. Honestly, I didn't know I could love him more than I already did. But in that moment, watching him protect our daughter publicly, watching him stake his claim on her, watching him make it impossible for anyone to pretend this wasn't a choice, I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for 4 years. This was a man. This was a father. This was someone who had decided what mattered. He looked directly at Patricia, and his expression was the most serious I'd ever seen it. He told her that if she couldn't treat Amber with the same love and respect she gave Devon's children, then she wouldn't be welcome at any future family event. Not dinners, not holidays, not milestones. If she wanted to be part of his life, she had to be part of both of our lives, as a complete package. He said it calmly. He said it permanently. And I realized that this wasn't him in the moment, this was who he'd always been. He was just finally letting it show. Then he turned to his father, Robert, and his voice cracked. Not from anger, but from something deeper, from 4 years of accumulated disappointment, finally reaching the surface. He asked Robert how many times he'd sat silently while Patricia humiliated a child. He asked how many times Robert had made himself small to avoid conflict. How many times he'd chosen comfort over courage. He said that silence is its own kind of cruelty, that it's the cruelty of people who know better but choose not to act. He told Robert that, from now on, he expected both of his parents to either accept Amber fully and treat her the way they treated Devon's children, or step back from their lives entirely. There would be no more middle ground, no more selective inclusion, no more second-class status. Robert's face went absolutely red. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. And for the first time in 4 years of knowing him, he looked like he wanted to disappear. He mumbled something about not realizing things had gotten this bad, but Marcus just shook his head slowly, like he'd heard that excuse too many times before and wasn't interested in hearing it again. The thing about finally speaking truth is that you have to really mean it. You have to be willing for people to be uncomfortable. Marcus was willing. Then something unexpected happened. Devon stood up, Marcus's sister. She walked over to her own children at the kids' table and pulled Amber gently between them. She invited Amber to sit right there with her cousins, no hesitation, no apology needed. Devon's youngest boy, a kid named Kai, actually scooted over and patted the chair and asked Amber if she wanted to see the drawing he'd made for Uncle Marcus. That small gesture, that beautiful, ordinary act of including someone, did something to me. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time since Eleanor had grabbed Amber. I felt something release in my chest. Not everyone in that family had failed her, just the 2 people who should have known better. Patricia, still pale, tried one more time to defend herself. She said she was trying to keep tradition alive, that family dinners had always worked this way, that blood relatives deserved to have priority. Marcus cut her off before she could finish. His voice was quiet, but absolutely unshakable. He told her that tradition wasn't an excuse for cruelty, and that he refused to raise Amber in a family that made her feel like a guest in her own life. He said that if Patricia couldn't understand that, then maybe it was time she spent some real time thinking about what mattered more to her, being right or being present in her grandchildren's lives, all of them, without exception. The rest of the dinner was tense, but different. The whole energy of the room had shifted on its axis. People weren't sure how to act anymore. Robert quietly moved to sit near Amber for a few minutes, asking her about school in this clumsy, sincere way that felt like he was trying to relearn how to be a good person. It was awkward, but it was genuine, and Amber was gracious with him the way children are when they're desperate to believe that adults want to see them. Patricia picked at her food, mostly silent, occasionally glancing toward Amber, with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between shame and the stubborn pride of someone who still believed she'd been right, even though her son had just publicly dismantled her entire worldview. She never apologized that night. I didn't expect her to. Some people need more than one uncomfortable dinner to unlearn a lifetime of favoritism and bias, but something had cracked open in that restaurant, and I don't think it was going to close back up quietly. The certainty was gone. The authority was gone. Patricia had been exposed as someone who would hurt a child to maintain hierarchy, and even she couldn't unsee that about herself now. Before we left the restaurant, Marcus knelt down in front of Amber one more time. He held up that birthday card, the one she'd spent 2 nights making, the one his mother had tried to erase, and he told her something that I need you to understand, because this is the part that heals the wound. He told her that this card was the best birthday present he had ever received. He said it like he meant it, like he was making a promise. He said he was going to keep it on his desk at work, so he could see it every single day, so that every morning he'd remember that he had a daughter who loved him enough to make something perfect for him, and that her love mattered more than anything else in the world. Amber's whole face transformed. The hurt drained away, the fear drained away, and she wrapped her arms around his neck so tightly that he actually laughed and nearly fell backward. I watched them together, and I felt something settle in me that had been unsettled since the moment she was born. This quiet certainty that no matter what happened, no matter how many people rejected her or tried to make her feel small, she had a father who would stand in a public restaurant and defend her honor. She would never be invisible to him. She would never be less than in his eyes. Driving home that night, Amber fell asleep in the back seat, still holding the wrapping paper from her gift to Marcus, and Marcus reached over and took my hand without saying anything. We didn't need to talk about what had happened. It had already been said clearly, and publicly, and permanently. There was no going back to the way things were before. Patricia hadn't transformed overnight. People like that don't usually transform at all, but the family dynamic had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. And here's what I want you to understand about this story, because there's something important I need to share with you. This story taught me that sometimes love isn't about keeping peace. Sometimes love is about drawing a line that can't be crossed. About saying this far and no further. About being willing to sacrifice comfort for truth. The mistake most people make is believing that family obligation means tolerating cruelty. It doesn't. If you have ever been in a room where someone looked right through you and decided you didn't belong, if you felt that cold assessment of someone trying to calculate your worth based on rules you never agreed to, then you know what Amber felt. And if you've ever been the person saying nothing while that happened, if you've been Robert, choosing silence over courage, then you need to know that your silence does damage. It really does. The practical thing you can do today is this. Look at the people in your life who feel like outsiders. The partners your family hasn't fully accepted, the kids that aren't technically blood, the people on the margins of your gatherings. And ask yourself one question. Am I making them feel welcomed? Or am I making them feel like a problem to be managed? That single question changes everything. And here's something to sit with. If choosing your child meant risking your mother's approval, which would you choose? Don't answer that quickly. Really think about it. Because your answer tells you something important about what you actually believe family means. I'm Marcus in this story. And I'm also Amber. And I'm also the Rachel who had to watch her daughter's pride get crushed because someone decided bloodlines mattered more than presence. But I'm also the woman who learned that sometimes the people we marry become the protectors our children needed. And that's its own kind of miracle. Amber still wears that dress sometimes, even though it reminds me of that restaurant. But she doesn't wear it with tears in her eyes anymore. She wears it like it's the dress she was wearing when her father proved that she mattered. If this story moved you the way it moved me to write it, please hit subscribe and join our community. Because we have so many more stories like this one coming, stories about family, about boundaries, about the moments where love is tested and either holds or breaks. Stories about becoming the people our children need us to be. You won't want to miss a single one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.